So let's bring in the Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan. Greg, always a pleasure to see you on a Wednesday night. I'll get into Vladimir Putin's trip to North Korea shortly, but just starting domestically, Peter Dutton very eager to link their nuclear announcement to the AUKUS agreement and the submarines. Here he is. Here's what he said this morning.
Would a Prime Minister sign up to an AUKUS deal using this nuclear technology to propel the submarines and to have our members of the Australian Navy on those submarines 24/7 if he thought or she thought that that technology was unsafe? No. And so you don't even hear the Labor Party talking about the technology being unsafe.
Not a bad comment or too long a bow to draw.
No, Steve, great to be with you. Look, Dutton is absolutely right on this. You know me, Steve, I'll criticise both sides and I'll give both sides credit where it's due. Dutton deserves enormous credit for this. This is the only development I've seen since the announcement of AUKUS which gives me any reason to think that AUKUS will ever come to anything. One of the big contradictions in AUKUS is that we're planning to become the only nation in the world and the only nation in the history of the world which has ever operated and owned, much less built, a nuclear submarine which doesn't have a nuclear industry. Now, all the other nations in the world which own and operate nuclear submarines have big nuclear energy industries. That means they have hundreds, thousands of nuclear engineers, nuclear technicians. They are masters of nuclear technology from go to woe, every aspect of it. Now, the idea that we could build nuclear submarines in Adelaide while we don't do a single other thing and have shown no get up and go on the issue at all. The Albanese government is too timid even to say where an East Coast submarine base might go, too timid to say where it's going to store the waste from our nuclear submarines reactors. The idea we could do this without having any other nuclear industry is just one of the many sort of fanciful, unbelievable aspects of AUKUS. But if we were developing a national nuclear industry, which is a terrifically good idea, I mean, it solves climate change, it solves energy reliability, it gives Australia back its energy comparative advantage, it's much cheaper in the long run. If we're doing the two things together, then they reinforce each other, and that means the AUKUS subs have got a chance of actually coming into existence. And as Dutton says, the arguments against nuclear reactors on safety are completely absurd if you argue that having nuclear reactors inside military vessels surrounded by weapons whizzing around the ocean at high speed and resting in Australia's major cities is perfectly safe, but having a settled, stable, singular nuclear reactor with the most proven technology in the world providing energy is somehow unsafe. Well, of course, that's crackers. So I think this is a very good development for AUKUS if it comes about.
I love the way you put it. The language you use is delightful. Thank you, Greg. Sky journalist Chang Lei, as we know, described being blocked from a second press event now being held by the Chinese. She's written about it on the Sky website tonight. Everyone should go and read it. She said, "Why could I not turn up? I had served my sentence. I was deported from China. I'm employed by an Australian news organisation. I got a media pass for Parliament House. I don't act out of turn. Why do they?" This whole treatment of her in her own country, in the Parliament of Australia, this has really shone a light on this visit in a very poor way, has it not?
Well, that's right, Steve. The Chinese state cannot help but disclose its true character. So this is not a criticism of Chinese people, and the ethnic Chinese in Australia are wonderful. But the Chinese Communist Party regime in Beijing is a totalitarian Stalinist regime. It doesn't respect democracy. It doesn't respect anyone's laws. It thinks the law is the Communist Party. So Chang Lei is an Australian citizen, a journalist with press credentials and all the rest of it, and they are trying to manhandle her in our own Parliament House. Now, Albanese's reaction to it initially was utterly pathetic, claiming he didn't know anything about it. Every time the Prime Minister is asked a difficult question, he gives you the same answer. The dog ate my homework. I don't know what you're talking about. And It wasn't until there was a wave of community criticism of him that the next day he said he raised it with the Chinese Premier. But this whole visit shows the sort of schizophrenic and difficult and paradoxical nature of our relationship with China. We do make a lot of money out of them by trade, and we should, as a matter of national policy, try to diversify our trade, but we're very bad at that. But at the same time, they are the chief strategic threat to us. They routinely breach the rights of Australian citizens on our own soil, especially Australian citizens of Chinese extraction. The long history of cyber espionage, foreign interference, and as the Premier left, Australia joined in allied denunciations of the Chinese for another reckless incident in which they collided with a Philippine ship in waters which China has no legal claim to and severely injured a Philippine sailor. But with our normal pusillanimity, we waited till the Chinese Premier had flown off before we joined in that statement. So 1 minute in Canberra, we're proclaiming that China is a comprehensive strategic partner. The next minute, we're saying we've got to acquire nuclear submarines to defend ourselves against China, and we condemn their military actions in the Philippines. And a final thought, Steve, this military communication, that's all great. But the problem with the Chinese military incidents at sea has not been a lack of communications. They weren't confused about what they were doing when they deployed sonars and injured our Australian sailors when they dropped chaff in front of an Australian helicopter and so on. They knew exactly what they were doing. Their communication was perfectly sound. This ridiculous visit was all about panda diplomacy and trying to redefine China as a benign force in Australian life. And I think too many of our politicians went along with it too uncritically. I'm not against having the guy visit, but it was too uncritical, and Albanese should have called out the treatment of Chang Lei straight away. He shouldn't have had to be hounded into doing that the next day.
Well said, Greg. Greg Sheridan, thank you very much as usual for your time.